Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our K-5 Parent Forum. I'm here this evening with Tim O'Connor to my left, Ty Zinkowitz, and Corey Allen. We wanted to share information with you tonight on the plans that have been underway for returning students to school K-5 for 4 days. I'm sure you'd like to ask some questions along the way. We will ask you to put your questions in the chat, and then at the end of our presentation, we'll answer the questions that have come to us. So I'm going to turn it over now to Ty.
Yep.
And he's going to share some information on this process that we've been through.
Thank you, Dr. Kissel. Just as we pull up the slideshow for you, could provide an overview of where we stand in terms of guidelines, testing, vaccinations. Then we'll dive a little bit closer and deeper into our K-5 approach and give you some information about some of the decisions that we've selected. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. O'Connor, who's going to start us off here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zinkowitz. And part of the role I'd like just to play for this forum tonight is just to share a little bit of the health and safety information that was used to support the work of the K-5 ad hoc committee as they made the recommendation for the 4-day learning model. And so as a school district, right, we look at and look for guidance from the Monroe County Health Department, the New York State Department of Health, and then most recently, the school guidance around COVID-19 from the CDC. And so the CDC is the agency that has produced and shared the most recent guidance for schools as it relates to COVID-19. So some of the information that we'll share tonight is related to the CDC guidance that was released on February 12th, 2021. And within that guidance, if we could go back just one slide, within that guidance, there was 5 mitigation strategies that were a theme throughout. And I'd like to just touch on that briefly. One of the first mitigation strategies was the universal and correct use of masks. And again, that's something that our district is currently doing. All of our students and staff are masked throughout the school day. The second one was on physical distancing. And all of our spaces, our classrooms, our shared spaces, our libraries, our auditoriums are all set up to maintain that 6 feet of social distance. So again, we check that box as well. In addition, our hand washing, our respiratory etiquette is in place. Our teachers do just a phenomenal job of reinforcing this with our students. Our nursing staff does a phenomenal job of emphasizing the importance of hand hygiene and respiratory hygiene. Additionally, our facilities department has just done a wonderful job around our cleaning efforts and the processes that they take to disinfect our schools on a nightly basis. And there are additional efforts to clean and disinfect those frequently touched surfaces. Moreover, we've had the opportunity to work pretty closely with the Monroe County Department of Public Health to support them with their efforts on contact tracing. So again, we're in contact with them to make sure that we're aware of any isolation or quarantine deadlines and time periods, right? So that we are making sure that healthy individuals are within our schools. So it's fortunate that we are able to check those boxes. And the guidance does say that we should prioritize the universal correct use of masks, and then also that 6 feet of physical distance should be maintained to the greatest extent possible. Also within the CDC guidance, we were provided with some indicators of community transmission. There was 2 metrics that were highlighted within that CDC guidance for indicators of community transmission of COVID-19. The first one was the total number of cases per 100,000 people within the last 7 days. The second being the percent positive test over the last 7 days. And then using those 2 indicators, the CDC has created this matrix that you see on the screen and divided transmission into 4 different levels: low transmission, moderate transmission, substantial transmission, and high transmission. And they have different values that would align with each one of those levels. So as we review the guidance and we look at our next slide here, we have to ask ourselves, well, where does Monroe County fall within these different transmission guidelines? And so our current levels, as of yesterday, in terms of our total number of new cases per 100K over the last 7 days, that's at 109. And as you can see in the upper right of the chart there, that puts us in the high transmission area. Conversely, if we look at our percent positive over the last 7 days, that's at 1.5%. So we have different values at either end of this spectrum. And so again, we have to go back to the guidance to determine which level we use. And the CDC guidance says we need to use the higher of the two if they are different. So looking at the next slide, we want to take a look at what does that mean, right? So based upon landing in a high transmission area, right, what does that mean for our school, for our school district? Well, and we need to continue to have that universal correct use of masking to make sure that we have that physical distancing and hand washing and respiratory etiquette, and that our cleaning procedures, and that we're maintaining healthy facilities, and that we're working with the Department of Health around contact tracing and isolation and quarantine periods. But specific to schools, it's a little bit different for elementary and our secondary schools, right? Where, again, looking under the red column and almost the red and orange put together here, elementary schools should be in a hybrid model with reduced attendance, and the physical distancing of 6 feet or more is required. Looking at the middle and high school, they say that it really should be virtual instruction only unless schools are already operating in person. And if that's the case, they could remain in person. And obviously the goal here, right, is to reduce our transmission and get into that low, that blue area. Whereas you can see on the screen, within that area, the K-12 schools can open for full in person, where that 6 feet of social distance should be maintained to the greatest extent possible. Further in the guidance, the CDC guidance, it talks about the phase mitigation and learning models. So we'll just touch on this briefly. It says that in-person learning for elementary schools, there's less likely to have risk of that in-school transmission than there would be for our middle school or high school students. That families of students who are at risk of those severe illness or live with individuals who may be at risk of illness are given the option of virtual instruction. And so we get into the survey and how some decisions were made around a 4-day model. We'll talk about the remote option that is still available to families. In-person instruction should be prioritized over extracurricular activities was included in that guidance, and that schools are encouraged to use cohorting or podding with students to help with that testing or contact tracing. And again, that's another practice that's currently in place as we have students in our blue learning group, our gold learning group, and our Spencerport and Ranger learning groups. And then lastly, for this slide, it's that students and teachers and staff who are at high risk, right, should have and be provided with a virtual learning option.
I just want to insert the slide pictures of the girls near each other without a mask on. Those were photos taken prior to COVID. And it's kind of a standard PowerPoint photos that we use.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Kissel. So as was mentioned, a survey was sent to our K-5 families as the K-5 ad hoc committee was exploring the possibility of a 4-day in-person learning model. And here's just a few questions from that survey. With question 5 here, starting with asking families to identify what their current learning model is. So you could see we have a blend of our remote students, our hybrid students who are in a 2-day, we're in a 2-day model at this point. And then our Spencerport group, it's our group of students who attend 4 days of the week, and then our Ranger group who attend 5 days. And then question 6, asked that if we were to implement a 4-day in-person instruction model, which method would families choose? And of our respondents, 84% indicated that they would want to be in the 4-day hybrid model. 11% indicated they'd like to stay in or potentially move to a remote model. And then 5% to round that out indicated that they would stay in the Spencerport or the Ranger group. So again, looking a little bit more into the survey, we did have over 1,200 responses. We were looking for a response rate of just over 1,400, and we'll talk about how we got the remaining responses and information from the community. But of the initial survey, as we previously mentioned, 84% of families and parents indicated that they wanted to participate in the 4-day hybrid model. 11% wanted to be in the remote, and that 11% equals about 180 students would remain in the remote learning model, and then 5% remaining in their group. And so as we looked at the survey results, some of the information that we wanted to really glean was, if we went to a 4-day model, how many students who are already in the hybrid model would want to then move to remote based upon it going to 4 days? And then conversely, how many students who are currently in a remote model, how many of those students would want to move back into school in person for 4 days? And so you can see the data on the slide here shows that we had a much greater number of our students and our families electing to come from a remote model back to a hybrid model. And I also want to just give a shout out to the schools who have reached out to all of the individuals who did not have a chance to complete the survey initially, and they have elicited a response from all individuals. So we do have good data on intended learning models for families. Again, back to the CDC guidance, there's language in there around vaccinations, right? That state and local officials should give priority to teachers and individuals associated with schools for vaccine distribution. But they did go on to say that access to vaccinations should not be considered as a condition for reopening for in-person instruction. And then also as a district, we did distribute a voluntary anonymous survey to get a sense of how many of our staff has been vaccinated at this point. And thus far, about 45% of our teachers have completed their vaccines, and about 20% of our non-teaching staff has completed their vaccine at this point. The CDC guidance goes on to talk about testing. They describe the difference between diagnostic testing and screening testing. Diagnostic testing is something that we have in place. Right? Diagnostic testing is the practice that we have of testing our symptomatic students, right? or staff members. So if an individual becomes symptomatic, they either need to have a negative COVID screen to return to school, or complete their isolation or quarantine period if they're a close contact. Screening testing is something that schools can do to get a sense of asymptomatic positive or asymptomatic cases to kind of help prevent that secondary transmission or potential outbreaks. So again, that's just some information that was shared with the ad hoc committee that hopefully supported some of their work to make the recommendation that we'll hear a little bit more about coming up next.
Thanks, Mr. O'Connor. So if you had the opportunity on Friday, when the principals sent out their Friday message, there was also a recording of a presentation that Dr. Kissel and myself did for our community. So just as a refresher, the charge of the ad hoc committee that Mr. O'Connor referenced was to consider and propose increased options for students in school learning. I think from there, as you're aware, the recommendation was made to Dr. Kissel to transition to 4 days of in-person learning beginning on Monday, April 12th. In addition to that, we have to create sections or pods that will be filled by staff members that could include intervention specialists or teaching assistants. And like Mr. O'Connor shared, we also have to continue with that remote learning option for our students. And there are about approximately 180 remote teachers. Those 180 remote students. Those remote students are supported by 3 teachers in each school. So each building has a K-1 remote teacher, a 2-3 remote teacher, and a 4-5 remote teacher. And those individuals will need to continue to support those students throughout the duration of the school year. And so you may be asking yourself, and I think some of the questions that were posed, how will we create additional groups and pods, and why do we need to create them? So this is actually a current example in a building And I just want to walk you through the math here. So under our current model of our blue students attending on Mondays and Thursdays, and our gold students attending on Tuesdays and Fridays, teacher one happens to have 13 students in the blue group and 13 students in the gold group. Teacher two has the exact same number, 13 and 13. So together, both of those teachers have 26 students. In Spencerport, we have class size guidelines that we try to adhere to at all times. Through the survey that Mr. O'Connor referenced, we have approximately 8 students that are returning from remote to hybrid, and that leaves us with 60 students total. So right now, over the course of this school year, we've had 2 teachers serving the students at this grade level. Now with returning to 4 days of in-person learning, these 2 teachers then would have to support 60 students. And as you can imagine, we're trying to maintain distancing guidelines, and we're managing our classes based on space. In this particular example, we would need to create 4 different groups served by 4 different teachers or teaching assistants to support the students. And that's where these additional pods come to play. So this particular grade level requires 2 additional adults to teach the students. Now, as a result, those adults are our intervention specialists who currently provide RTI services. And you may have heard that we then are suspending those services beginning on Tuesday. And why the decision to start on April 12th? Well, we have a lot of work to do between now and then. That work includes creating these groups and pods, managing our transportation demands, furniture, ensuring that all the classrooms are equipped and these new learning spaces are equipped for the students that they will serve. And also, most importantly in some ways, the curriculum, the design of instruction to ensure that our students continue to receive a first-class education. Our hope is to mail this information out before the spring recess. And obviously, things are changing rapidly. And if something does change, we want to make sure that we inform our community. And so you're aware of the resulting change. So moving forward with this 4-day model, on Wednesdays, asynchronous learning opportunities will be posted on March 24th and April 7th. And those 2 dates are to allow teachers, facilities to accommodate those different changes in the demands that I previously referenced, going from furniture and equipment to instruction, to supporting those individuals that are going to be working with your children. Then beginning on Wednesday, April 14th, classroom teachers will continue to post asynchronous learning opportunities for their in-person students on Wednesdays. So that's a slight change from what your children have experienced up to this point. With that theme of Wednesdays, perhaps you have a remote student. Well, we will continue to follow the same format on Wednesdays with their remote teacher. Their special area teachers will post asynchronous learning each week and will Zoom with their students on Wednesdays on the appropriate letter day. Now, with that, we want to stop here and provide you an opportunity, similar to what Dr. Kissel shared, to pose questions to us, and we'll try our best to answer them. So we're just going to pull up the chat right now. So first question is, if I have children in separate grades, will they be able to ride the bus together? Yes, that is our hope. That is our expectation, and we will work with our transportation department in order to ensure that that happens. In terms of the question, is the 109 number, we reported the total number of cases per 100,000 residents. I'm going to allow Mr. O'Connor to respond to that.
Yes, that 109 number is the total number of new cases per 100,000 in the past 7 days
In Monroe County.
in Monroe County.
So the next question asks about childcare. If the district will be providing that, no, that is not our expectation that we'll be servicing in a child caring capacity with these changes beginning on Monday, April 12th. Next question, if the CDC announces any changes to social distancing guidelines, what will be the next steps? I think I shared moments ago that would require us to perhaps reconvene our ad hoc committee and have a conversation about the best approach to follow. Next question, when your child is moved to a new learning pod, how often will they touch base with their original classroom teacher? How will they plan to meet the needs of those students in the learning pods? Well, that's a really good question. And I think it's going to differ from grade level to grade level. And I think once we finalize this, and once we then create those additional pods, principals then will be the best individuals to answer that question. Because it does vary across the 24 different sections in our district. By 24, I mean 4 schools with 6 grades per school. Question, will students continue to Zoom on Wednesdays? Remote students will be the only individuals that will be Zooming on Wednesdays. However, a classroom teacher may continue to do that, but the expectation right now is for our students to receive asynchronous learning opportunities on Wednesdays. So the next question, how does the team square the CDC recommendations considering that our current implementation of sports is contrary to the CDC guidelines? I think that's a really fair question. I think the information that we've heard from Dr. Mendoza is that participating in an extracurricular activity such as interscholastic sports is voluntary. And because of that voluntary notion, they then are deviating from the CDC guidelines. How will the teaching assistants be supported as they are now teachers? I think that's part of the impetus behind our Wednesdays. We want to ensure that our teaching assistants receive the necessary assistance and support. Those individuals will be working under the guidance of a classroom teacher. Will students still receive guided read instruction when in learning pods? Yes, and I think that's a good connection to the previous question, knowing that the teaching assistants currently support guided reading along with intervention specialists. So the expectation is that will continue. In Spencerport, as you know, we follow the guided reading model. We also follow the math workshop model, and we don't envision moving away from that. In terms of RTI support, right now we will continue to progress monitoring our students, especially those individuals that might be at a higher tier. And those individuals will also be working with intervention specialists or a teaching assistant within the confines of the school day. Just keep moving down. So will students leave their laptops at home, at school, or need to bring them back and forth? And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Allen, if I could put you on the spot there for a moment.
Absolutely, Mr. Zinkowicz. That's a great question. And what we're trying to do is support our earliest learners. So for instance, our kindergarten and first grade students will not carry their devices back and forth on the days that they are in school. They will leave them in school so that we can charge those and they can continue to utilize instructional technology while in school, where our grades 2 through 5 will be bringing their devices back and forth from home to school so that they can use those devices at home as well.
So there's also a question about the letter day schedule. That will change and it will take effect on Monday, April 12th. If it hasn't been released yet by the schools, we'll ensure that they include that either in their Friday message or we'll post it on the website. terms of asynchronous Wednesdays, specifically on March 24th and April 7th. Those classes, teachers will be posting work in either Schoology or in Seesaw, depending on the learning management system that they utilize. And that students will then have access to that information based on the directions that are either posted in those learning management systems or that they've directly received from their teacher. In terms of the bus schedule, we're working diligently with transportation. And our hope, once again, is within the next week or so, we'll be providing that information and updates to our families when we talk about bus times, changing bus numbers, perhaps, all the specifics. We want to provide enough time for that April 12th start date. So another question just about 6 feet of social distancing with all students in school 4 days, and will all students in this classroom, or are they looking at an alternative space? We are looking at alternative space, and it differs from building to building. There's some schools that may have a larger special area room that could be then converted into a classroom in order to accommodate more individuals, more students. So our teams in the buildings have been very creative. They know the schools better than we do. And with that creativity, they've been able to utilize the space available to make those specific changes. So for example, if an additional pod is created at a specific grade level, that is either going to be closer in proximity to the other 2 or 3 classrooms, that's an option. Or perhaps it might be down the hall, but it's going to meet the needs of the students as they go through that rotation within the confines of the day.
Minimize this real quickly just to see. Jumping forward. Step up.
So question just about the rationale of going 4 days. Right now, as I previously stated, the 4 days is in order to provide our teachers the necessary time to work with their colleagues who may be new to that particular grade level or that particular discipline. And we need to ensure that our curriculum maps are aligned and the support that they provide those individuals as they are collaborating throughout the course of the day in order to best meet our students. In terms of the calculation on total cases, I'm going to allow Mr. O'Connor to answer that one.
So for the 2 different metrics, the calculation over 1,000 persons for the past 7 days at 109, that is a calculation that, again, is taken from data that's supplied by the Monroe County Health Department, using, I believe, approximately about a 750,000 person population within Monroe County to come up with that number.
There's also a question too, just about exploring a similar process at the 6-12 level. We are in conversations right now. We are working on a similar survey to be released in the coming days for the families in grades 6 through 12. And our hope is to work collaboratively in order to ensure a possible return for our secondary students too. In terms of special needs, any student with an IEP, we have a responsibility with that IEP to meet the accommodations, and that will continue. So in terms of specials, with this 4-day model, so our calendar will reflect those 4 days, so Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and that students will attend specials during their regularly scheduled time, similar to what occurred back on March 13th, 2020.
Question in regards to 6 feet, and will students be able to maintain 6 feet when returning to school? I think this question goes back to the need to create those pods of students so that we have smaller numbers of students in classrooms.
In terms of our in-person learners, they will not be required to complete any specials outside the school day. All of their specials will occur Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, based on that letter day rotation. Specials daily. Question, will speech and other related services still be available to students? Yes, it will be. Once again, we'll meet the needs of a child's IEP or 504 plan as per the regs.
Question about transportation and specifically about the dropping off and picking up of students and also transporting by bus. We will continue to maintain social distancing on buses as well as masking, and we will be working with facilities and grounds to ensure that we have plans and those plans are communicated for both pickup and drop off of students at all K-5 buildings.
We are not exploring or considering changing the beginning or end day times of the student day. They will continue to remain the same.
Specials again.
I apologize for the delay. We were reading through these questions in real time, and many of them are great questions, but are a bit repetitive in nature in the fact that they are common questions that we're seeing throughout the Q&A.
In terms of musical performances, that's something that we will revisit next week, and we'll have a conversation to see if our students at the elementary level can also engage in that musical performance.
I would add that the high school and middle school are looking at musical productions on a smaller scale that adhere to the distancing guidelines, but we're excited that they're going to have that opportunity.
Yeah, in terms of the role of teaching assistant, they're there to support teachers. They'll be working directly with students under the guidance of the teacher, but the students will be rotated throughout all the adults assigned to a specific grade level.
Question in regards to homework, other than asynchronous work on Wednesdays. I think what we will find is the teacher will provide that asynchronous learning, which also includes other to-dos throughout that day.
In terms of homework, we're not anticipating a major change to homework under this 4-day model. I think that time on Wednesdays, in terms of that asynchronous work that will be available, that will be time for our students to either reflect on previous learning or to learn new concepts that will be supported the following day.
Just an ask for clarification on the laptops. So yes, grades 2 through 5 will be asked to bring those home each and every night.
In terms of when you will know about the staff assignment, our hope is that you will receive that notification over spring recess.
Another question about drop off and pickup. And again, all schools are working on those plans that will be communicated to parents who have indicated that they can drop off or pick up throughout the day.
There's a question about lunch. In order to accommodate social distancing guidelines, in knowing that's when students will not be wearing a mask, we are doing some creative things such as expanding space, expanding the length of when students can possibly have lunch, meaning extending the time period. We're also ensuring that we cap that space to a certain level.
This question about Going back to remote.
So a question is, if the 4-day change doesn't work out for a student, for a child, can they then move them back to remote? That option, we would ask that you make that decision relatively quickly, knowing the implications that come with that. Many of these decisions that we're making in terms of podding, in terms of supporting our remote students, any changes that may occur, is based on the information that we receive from families. So the more changes that we receive, the more difficult it is to predict how we move forward.
Stagger drop off and pick up. How will lunches be handled?
So we're just receiving a lot of questions about lunch. I feel like I answered it.
Lunches again. Lunches. $6'3" fund.
So the question is, will my children still be required to complete the special assignments in Schoology during the week as they do, or will they be all done when the students are in school during the 4 days? It's our expectation that special assignment may be done just dedicated for Wednesdays, but it'll be minimized, knowing that under our current model, students are learning remotely 3 days a week. And in this proposed model, starting on April 12th, it'll be reversed. Will be 4 days of in-person instruction. We also have a question just about the options of available options for families, and meaning to continue the current model. It's just very difficult to staff when you have 1,400 students, about 80 staff members, trying to manage and trying to predict, how do we ensure, social distancing in all 4 buildings across all 6 grade levels.
Specials.
So for specials, will students still have special Zooms on Wednesday? The only special Zooms on Wednesday will be for remote students.
When will this information be sent out?
So information, just as a reminder, will be sent out over spring recess.
Question about masks, if you want.
We also have, have we received permission to move forward? We've submitted this plan to the state. So question just to clarify, next week, Blue Gold students still go to school on their normal scheduled days. That is correct. That'll occur not only for next week, but also the week of April 5th. And Wednesdays will be asynchronous. Beginning the week of April 12th, students will then begin on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday will also be asynchronous. There's a question. We will continue to meet any accommodations on an IEP or a 504. That will continue through April 12th and then beyond. So there's a question about randomized testing in pods in the event of perhaps an outbreak, or if we reach a certain threshold. I'll allow Mr. O'Connor to answer that.
Yeah, so in that case, we would collaborate with the Monroe County Department of Public Health when a positive case is identified, and we would use their close contact criteria of 6 feet or less of social distance, with one or more of those individuals being unmasked. So if that did come up, we would work with the county health department to identify any potential close contacts, and then implement any quarantine or isolation periods.
So we have a question about summer services for students. With the exception of last summer, Spencerport has traditionally offered the following programs for students, for eligible students. And those students are selected and identified at the building level. But typically we have, for our entering kindergarten students, a Jumpstart program. We then have current kindergarten going to first grade. It's called Leap into First program. We also have a 2-5 academy for students in grades 2 through 5. We also provide a program for our ELL students. Those programs are scheduled to run from July 12th through August 12th. And we typically provide transportation as well. The expectation for those programs is a Monday through Thursday, approximately 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And we understand the need to provide support to our students. And so we're looking forward to resuming those programs this summer. So in terms of questions about rotated through the adults, it could vary. It could vary from the adults moving from room to room to students rotating from room to room, similar to what they're doing right now in terms of perhaps you may have students that are receiving the support from a co-teacher. So student may leave for pull-out services.
Will 4-day continue through next school year?
So question, will this model of 4 days per week continue through next school year? I think we're all of the opinion. We hope not. We would like to return to 5 days as quickly as possible. And our hope is that the 21-22 school year will resemble things that we're all accustomed to, that we all miss. In terms of how much time of the day will be spent rotating, it will be minimal. I mean, there will be rotations similar when we look at grades 6 through 12, when students go from class to class to class. I mean, those rotations will occur throughout the school day, but they will be, as seamless as possible. And they will not take, I don't envision more than collectively 5-10 minutes. There's a few questions about homework and 2-5 laptops.
Yeah, 2-5. Can we address that again?
Sure.
So just a couple more questions on and clarifications on 2-5 laptops. Students at grades 2 through 5 will be taking their devices home each night, and the teachers will ask parents as well as students, just as a reminder, to charge those devices at home at night, much in the same way it has been done to this point for our hybrid students.
The screen sharing has dropped.
There's a question about access to the current teacher. It does vary from school to school, grade level to grade level. So that's difficult to respond. That's part of the reason on Wednesdays. So for instance, next Wednesday, the conversations that are taking place in terms of how do we group our students and how do we pod our students. In terms of will specials be held in their classroom or in the special room? So right now, as you know, with our hybrid students, they're holding their specials in their teacher's classroom with the exception of physical education. On April 12th, we're looking to make changes to that, where those students then will be going to a different room, a specials room for their special class. In terms of the end of the school year, so what will the date be? That's something that the district typically decides and then communicates after spring recess. And the reason behind that is that we need to meet so many days and so many hours of instruction in order to meet state guidelines. And so typically we wait till after spring recess because of items such as, for instance, emergency closings, and we want to ensure that we have the necessary time accrued to meet those guidelines. So that will be communicated in April at some point. We have a question just about transportation. Urban Suburban will continue to transport during the 4 days. I know that our elementary principals have been in contact with First Choice Transportation Services to ensure that those services are not disrupted. In terms of the health questionnaire, I think that's a really good question. You know, Mr. O'Connor shared some of the mitigation strategies. We will continue to have the health questionnaire as a requirement. So every family will need to complete. The more that those are completed, so if we can reach 100%, it will make it easier for the transition in the morning. That's one of the pieces too that we're working on in terms of logistics of when students, knowing that we're doubling the number of students that will be coming in on a daily basis, we really need to streamline that process. And that's currently being developed right now in each of the 4 schools, because each of the 4 schools are taking a slightly different approach based on their structure and layout.
Question on process to establish.
Question, yeah. We have a question about assessment. So in terms of how students will be assessed if they're working with multiple adults, I think that's part of the piece of the power of collaboration and teachers, teaching assistants getting together and having conversations about student progress from April 12th to the conclusion of the school year. In terms of when middle and high school will return to 4 days, that's still being discussed, and we hope to have information to our community as quickly as possible.
You know, I would comment there that 6 through 12 wouldn't be able to return to school with the 6 feet guidelines. That we would have to see some modification of those guidelines before we could implement that. At the same time, since we believe there's possibilities that those discussions are taking place, that we want to survey our parents of the secondary level and find out their interest in remote or returning students to school.
There was a question about extending the school year. No, the school year, the latest that could possibly go would be Thursday, June 24th. There's a question about state testing and the plan for students that are opting out of state testing. You should have received a letter by now. And that letter was developed and sent out by all of the 4 principals. And we're asking that you contact your building's principal by Friday, March 26th. And I think from that, it will dictate then what that day looks like on that assigned day for testing for ELA, which will begin in April and then math in May. There's a question about if social distancing guidelines change, what will it look like here in Spencerport in terms of the number of days that students attend? That is subject for conversation, and we will need to explore that in terms of when that decision is made and what type of impact it will have here in Spencerport.
Just a question about
Yeah.
quarantine.
So there's a question if a child is staying home during a specific day, can they participate online? That would really be based on the teacher and what they're posting in their learning management system. There's a question about how much time younger students, kindergarten, will spend with no instruction. We have an instructional time allotment chart, and what that means is how many minutes each subject receives within the confines of the day, and we're not anticipating that changing with this 4-day model. There's a question about driving students to school over break. There will not be school during that week of spring recess, so no transportation will be required, either from the parents or provided by the school district. In terms of attendance on Wednesdays, that will continue to be a requirement.
Question in regards to students who opt out of state testing, as we've done in the past, we will include respectful instruction during that time, or instructional opportunities. We will also be implementing masking as well as social distance, just to keep to those guidelines. And that's the question is asking, will that happen if students opt out of state assessments?
Keep scrolling. There's a question about opting out of state assessments. Will it be reflected on a student's transcript? No, it will not. It will just not be a score there. So I know that there's a lot of questions that are probably still remain. I know also that we're continuing to work on this and develop a system that we can put in place for Monday, April 12th. The buildings are working diligently right now. And my hope is that we can provide an opportunity for principals to answer some of the specific questions that you may have, because there's certain things that they're developing in their respective schools. So we really appreciate you taking this time to meet with us. Hopefully we're able to provide you a little bit more information about our steps and our plans moving forward. Really can't thank you enough for your continued partnership with the school district. Dr. Kissel?
I would just like to add that we're excited about having students return to school. We're excited to think that students that have been in different groups will get to see each other and be together. We're sensitive to the social and emotional learning needs of students as they do return and integrate back into school and more normal life. So we're excited about this prospect. We know that you have questions and it is evolving. We don't have every answer at the moment, and our answers may change depending on the information that we have, but we're committed to returning kids back to school. And we appreciate everything that you've done in this very difficult year. Thank you, Ty, for all your great answers, and Tim, Corey. We have a great team here, and we respect and value the relationship we have with all of our parents. Thank you very much for participating in this, and hopefully any other questions you have between us and your principals that we can provide the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a
Take
good
care.
evening.